Long before any modern excavation tools touched the ground, before archaeologists arrived with scanners, robots, and maps, this place was already ancient. Teotihuacan once stood as one of the largest cities in the ancient world. At its height, it covered more than 20 square kilometers and housed a population that rivaled many cities in Europe at the same time. Yet despite its scale, Teotihuacan left behind no written records that explain who built it, how it was governed, or why it was eventually abandoned. What remains instead is structure. The city was laid out with precision. Its avenues align with celestial events. Its pyramids follow a strict geometric order. Nothing here appears accidental. But the most carefully controlled part of Teotihuacan was not above ground. Beneath its plazas and pyramids, the builders carved artificial spaces into the volcanic bedrock. Not caves formed by erosion, but passages shaped deliberately by human hands. For centuries, these underground spaces remained sealed and untouched. No signs of collapse. No evidence of intrusion. No indication that they were meant to be reopened. That silence mattered. Because in ancient Teotihuacan, sealing a space did not mean abandoning it. It meant closing something that had fulfilled its purpose. Archaeologists knew that whatever lay beneath the temple of the feathered serpent was not part of daily life. It was not storage. It was not shelter. It was intentional. And it was hidden. For generations, researchers respected that boundary. The structures above ground could be mapped, measured, and studied without disturbing what lay below. Until nature intervened. In 2003, heavy rainfall caused the ground near the temple to give way, exposing the entrance to a man-made tunnel, one that had been buried for nearly 2,000 years. What had remained sealed by ancient design was suddenly accessible again. And for the first time, modern humans were faced with a choice. Whether some places, once closed, should ever be opened again. The moment the ground collapsed, the situation changed. In early 2003, after days of heavy rain, the earth near the temple of the feathered serpent gave way. What appeared at the surface was not a natural cavity. It was an opening, a vertical shaft, carefully shaped, leading downward. Beneath one of the most studied structures in Teotihuacan, there was something no one had ever fully documented. For archaeologists, this was not just a discovery. It was a dilemma. Leaving the tunnel sealed meant preserving an unknown space forever. Opening it meant crossing a boundary that ancient builders had intentionally closed. The responsibility fell to Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, INAH. Their mandate was clear. Protect the site. Preserve the past. Advance knowledge without causing irreversible damage. But the pressure was equally real. Teotihuacan had never yielded a royal tomb. No confirmed ruler. No clear center of political authority. If such evidence existed anywhere, it would be below a monument like this. After months of evaluation, the decision was made. The tunnel would be explored. Not opened all at once. Not entered blindly. Engineers reinforced the shaft. Sensors monitored air quality and stability. Small robotic units were prepared to go first. Every step was designed to reduce risk. Still, the choice itself carried weight, because this was not excavation in an open field. This was a descent beneath a sacred structure, into a space deliberately buried nearly 2,000 years earlier. The original builders had sealed the tunnel layer by layer. Stone, soil, debris, not in haste, but with intention. By choosing to remove that seal, modern researchers were not just uncovering history, they were reversing a decision made by an ancient civilization. And once that process began, there would be no way to undo it completely. Once the decision was made, the descent began slowly. This was not a place designed for people to enter. The shaft was narrow. The walls were fragile, and the air below was unknown. Beneath the temple of the feathered serpent in Teotihuacan, the tunnel extended downward between 14 and 18 meters, before leveling into a long horizontal passage. nearly 100 meters in length. Engineers reinforced the entrance first. Air sensors were installed. Structural movement was monitored in real time. Then the robots went down. Small, tracked, equipped with cameras and scanners. They moved inch by inch through a space that had not been seen for nearly 2,000 years. As the tunnel opened, one detail became immediately clear. This was not an abandoned space. The walls were deliberately shaped. The floor was leveled. The ceiling followed a controlled geometry. And then there was the fill. Layer after layer of stone and soil, packed tightly, blocking forward movement. This was not collapsed debris. It was intentional sealing. Removing it required manual excavation. Slow, careful, measured. Each bucket of material taken out reversed a choice made by the original builders. As the team progressed, the environment changed. Oxygen levels fluctuated. Humidity increased. The temperature dropped. Then came the chambers. Small rooms branching off the main passage. Some empty, some holding offerings. Stone objects, ceramics, organic remains. And in several areas, something unexpected. Liquid mercury. Collected deliberately. Not spilled. Not accidental. Its presence raised immediate concerns. Mercury is toxic. Its vapor accumulates in enclosed spaces. Prolonged exposure is dangerous. Work slowed again. Protective protocols were expanded. Time limits were imposed on human entry. Some sections were left untouched. The deeper the excavation went, the clearer the pattern became. This tunnel was never meant to be reopened. Not easily, not safely. Yet the process continued. Because stopping now meant leaving questions unanswered. And continuing meant pushing further into a space that had been sealed for a reason. At first, everything still looked manageable. The tunnel was stable. The instruments were functioning. The work continued. Beneath the temple of the feathered serpent in Teotihuacan, the excavation appeared to be under control. Then the numbers changed. Oxygen levels dropped below expected margins. Not once, but repeatedly. Humidity climbed faster than predicted. Condensation spread across the stone walls. Footing became unreliable. Still, none of this forced a shutdown. The team adjusted. Ventilation was modified. Schedules were shortened. The project moved forward. Then mercury levels were measured. In several sections of the tunnel, exposure thresholds were exceeded far sooner than anticipated. Not slightly, decisively. This was not a theoretical risk. Mercury vapor accumulates silently. Its effects do not appear immediately, which makes it dangerous. Protective limits were revised again. Human access was reduced. Some areas were declared machine-only. At this point, the excavation could have stopped. Nothing essential would have been lost. The tunnel had been mapped. The chambers identified. The presence of ritual materials confirmed. The core questions could have remained unanswered, but safely. Instead, the work continued, because no single warning on its own was enough to justify walking away. Each problem had a solution. Each risk had a workaround. But taken together, they formed a pattern. The ancient fill had been stabilizing the structure. Removing it introduced stress. The sealed environment had been balanced. Opening it disrupted airflow. The space was no longer behaving as it had for centuries. This was not collapse. Not yet. But it was no longer stable. And this was the moment when the excavation stopped being an exploration and became a risk. The consequences did not announce themselves. They accumulated quietly until they could no longer be contained. Every solution created to keep the excavation alive reduced the margin for error. Ventilation adjustments stabilized oxygen, but only by accelerating air movement through spaces never designed for it. Exposure limits that protected the team but cut human access down to minutes. Machines replaced people, but machines could not judge when the space itself was beginning to fail. Beneath the temple of the feathered serpent in Teotihuacan, the excavation was no longer operating under control. It was operating under tolerance. Structural readings showed progressive stress in areas where ancient fill had been removed. Not sudden failure. Something worse. Gradual destabilization. The tunnel stopped behaving as a single system. Air stagnated in some chambers. Condensation flooded others. Temperature differences widened. No two sections behaved the same way. Predictability disappeared. At the same time, the reason for continuing collapsed. There was no royal tomb, no central burial, no evidence of a ruler waiting to be discovered. The deeper the excavation went, the clearer the truth became. This space was never meant to reveal authority, only intention, offerings, carefully placed materials, objects arranged not to display power, but to mark a boundary the ancient builders had deliberately closed. By this stage, continuing no longer increased understanding. It only increased exposure. Every additional meter excavated removed material that had been stabilizing the structure for centuries. Every hour spent inside the tunnel added a cumulative risk, not just to the team below, but to the monument above. The project had crossed a line. It was no longer an exploration seeking answers. It was an intervention sustained by momentum. And momentum is not justification. At this point, continuing meant accepting damage as an acceptable cost. Not because there was something left to find, but because stopping had become difficult. That was the consequence. There was no single accident that forced the excavation to stop. No collapse. No public emergency. What stopped it was a growing recognition of what continuing would cost. Beneath the temple of the feathered serpent in Teotihuacan, the risks were no longer limited to the people inside the tunnel. They extended to the site itself. Every meter excavated removed material that had stabilized the structure for nearly 2,000 years. Every adjustment made for modern access altered an environment never designed to be reopened. What could be damaged would not be replaceable, and what was lost would be lost permanently. At the same time, the scientific value of continuing was diminishing. No royal tomb had emerged. No new explanatory framework was forming. What remained were symbolic spaces whose meaning was already clear. Further excavation now threatened to destroy the very evidence it was meant to protect. Within the archaeological community, the question began to shift. Not what could still be found, but whether modern intervention was beginning to overwrite the past. Teotihuacan was not a closed laboratory. It was a protected heritage site. Any irreversible damage would be carried by future generations, not just by the researchers involved. The responsibility was no longer technical. It was ethical. The decision followed. Excavation would stop. The tunnel would be sealed. Human access would be restricted. Only documentation and data already recovered would remain part of the scientific record. What modern researchers chose next was not exploration. It was restraint. They closed the tunnel, not because there was nothing left to learn, but because preserving the site now mattered more than satisfying curiosity. Even after the tunnel was sealed, the questions did not disappear. They remained, not unanswered because of failure, but because answering them would require crossing a line that was never meant to be crossed. Beneath the temple of the feathered serpent in Teotihuacan, there are spaces modern researchers have mapped but will likely never enter. Not because they cannot, but because they should not. We still do not know who was allowed into the tunnel when it was first constructed. We do not know how often it was used or by whom. We do not know why it was sealed so completely, layer by layer, as if reopening it was never intended. The presence of liquid mercury remains unexplained. Its symbolic role is debated. Its practical purpose is unknown. What is clear is that it was placed deliberately in a space designed to be closed. Modern science can document these facts. It can record measurements, analyze materials, and model environments. But it cannot answer why a civilization chose restraint over access. In that sense, the most important decision was not made by modern archaeologists. It was made nearly 2,000 years ago, when the builders of Teotihuacan closed the tunnel and walked away. By sealing it, they preserved something, not just a structure, but a boundary. A line between what was meant to be known and what was meant to remain untouched. When modern researchers chose to seal the tunnel again, they were not solving a mystery. They were acknowledging one. Because some questions do not remain unanswered due to lack of knowledge. They remain unanswered because answering them would come at too high a cost. And sometimes, the most responsible thing science can do is stop.